In this lesson, we'll learn a cool technique for creating groups. So we're picking up directly where we left off with the last lesson, and what we're doing is generating different groups so that we can isolate where our materials are going to be applied. So far we've got one group, and it is for the tire rubber material that will be the outside part of the tire. The next thing that we need to do is to create a group that will isolate this brake drum away from these other materials. Easily enough, I'm just going to start by selecting the set of primitives here on the back of the geometry. And I want to show you a very cool technique here. You can use Shift and press G on your keyboard. G is in grow, and it will grow the selection. So you can just continue to tap it, and it will grow. Or you can just hold it down and it will rapidly grow. So I can do Shift and I'm just pressing G and holding it down, and I can watch it fill up that particular area all in one smooth move. So I'll just do one more, Control G and tap here. Now, if I continue to do Control G from this point forward, it'll start to climb up the areas here on the chrome, and I don't really want this area to share the same material as the brake drum. So I'm going to undo that just by clicking away to drop my selection. And I'm going to again select these guys here on the back. And I'll do Control G and just sort of tap Control G. Now as I'm doing that, of course, it's growing my selection, or Shift G, I apologize. Shift G is growing my selection. So we're moving along here, we're creeping up on that section. Now from here I need to stop because, like I said, if I continue I start to crawl into the areas that I want to be chrome. So what I can do from this point forward is use my paint selection tool to grab the rest of these faces. So I'm just going to come over here to the select option on the far left hand toolbar, and from the flyout I'm going to press and hold with my left button. That'll give me this little flyout. And from this flyout, I want to choose brush picking. Okay, brush picking gives me a little icon that looks sort of like a paintbrush from Photoshop. And basically, it will allow me to drag around on this surface, and anything that's underneath my mouse, I can either add to or subtract from the current selection. So I've already got these faces or primitives selected up to this point. Let's go ahead and hit Shift on the keyboard. You'll notice I do get the little plus icon beside my paintbrush selection tool. And I'm just going to left click and come through here and start dragging around on this geometry. And as I do, you'll see here that I am actually selecting it. And as soon as I release my mouse, it's added to my selection set. Now, I did get off a little bit, just got a little bit here onto my chrome area. If you hold down the Control key while you drag, it will remove that from your selection. So it really is a lot like painting. We just sort of come through here and paint exactly what it is that we want. So I'm just sort of dragging, Shift, being sure to hold Shift down, make sure I see the little plus sign there on my cursor. And just kind of making these selections. Getting in between the little crevices here of the geometry for the spikes. Now I also see that I have some geometry along this edge here. So I'm just coming in here. We're going to select all of that. And by tumbling around like this and sort of moving through your viewport, it's not necessarily in any locked camera view, but it allows you to really get a good look at what it is that you have selected. Before you create your group, you always want to make sure that you do have everything that you want and that you don't have any spare faces sitting around inside of your selection. So I think that looks pretty good to me. We've got all of the faces and primitives here that we want. So it's the same technique as what we used before when we created the tire. Once I have all of the faces selected that I want, all I have to do is hit Tab on the keyboard and spell out group, G-R-O-U-P. Then come over and click on the word group. The group node is added and connected for me here in the network view. And it has created this new group. Of course, it's called Group 1 as it is by default. I will definitely want to rename that. So I'll call that mat, short for material, underscore brake drum. then underscore group. I like to use the underscore group here at the end just because it's easier when you're just kind of glancing through your nodes. If you're not familiar with the icons and what each icon means, you'll be able to easily read and see that, oh, this is the node that created the group. So even though we know right now as we're doing it, later on when we go back through our scene, it might be a little more difficult to see exactly what's happening at what point in the network. So leaving the word group in there is really handy. Okay, so I also want to make sure that my group itself is named Matt Brake Drum, because we know here if I middle click, I have created the group. I see that I have the new 640 primitives, but it's just in this group called Group 1. Not very descriptive. Let's go ahead and copy the name of the node here from the parameter editor. So Control C will copy that. And I'm just going to select the name Group 1 and Control V. Now whenever I middle click on this second group node, you'll see that I have two groups, one in material brake drum group and one in material tire rubber group. Well, all that's left now is to make the third group that will have all of the chrome elements. Now, we could come through here and try to very carefully select all of these nodes and use the paintbrush tool to select just these other areas in between and spend all this time painting. But Houdini itself is a much more procedural program by nature. So we're going to use a procedural method to create this next material group. With your mouse hovering over the network view, go ahead and hit Tab and just create a new group. So let's go ahead in our viewport here as well. On the left-hand toolbar, we're just going to pick box picking again and click off into the nothing so we don't have anything selected. We'll connect up our group here and move the display flag down to Group 1. Now just by default, just like this, let's go ahead and middle click and notice that we have listed 2,784 primitives in Group 1. Well, that's because by default, just laying down a group node will put every single primitive that you have in that chain at that point in that group. Well, there's several different ways that you can create groups. You may have noticed before, when we made these first two groups, down here in the parameters view, here are the different ways that you can actually create those groups here. You can do them by number, you can do them by bounding, you can do them via normal, you can also do them via edges. And the first way that we did it, because we had these particular primitives selected in the viewport, and remember if you want to hunt that down, you can turn on your primitive numbers. We have a lot of primitives here, so it might be a little difficult. But trust me, the primitives that we had selected when we instigated the grouping tool are what was populated here inside of this pattern of this node. Same applied for the brake drum. These are the faces, or primitive numbers, if you will, that were selected whenever we created that group node. If we look inside this very last one, there is no pattern. It's completely empty. So Houdini has put every single primitive in that group. I'm going to turn off my group numbers here and show you another method of actually creating this group. So basically what we've got is we've got our tire rubber area defined. We've got our inner brake drum area defined, and we want to apply another material to everything else. Correct? So we'll apply something to the areas we've defined for the rubber, apply something to the areas we've defined to be the brake drum, and everything else will be chrome. Well, here's how we can create the everything else group without having to select any geometry out of the viewport. Let's go ahead and give it a correct name. So we're going to name the group Matte Chrome Group. That way I know it's Matte for a material. The material will be some kind of chrome, and it is a group node that we're using. So let's scroll up a little bit here inside the parameters view on the right-hand side of your interface. The group name, again, I want to make sure that it duplicates what is here inside of the network view. It doesn't have to, by the way. You could call it anything that you wanted to in here. You can call it avocado, and if you middle click now, you'll see that you now have 2,784 groups, primitives in the group avocado. It just really is a lot more useful if they match what's in the network view for whenever you're trying to track down problems or use that group again. So I'm just going to make sure that it's named the same thing here. Okay. Now, you'll notice here under these tabs when we discussed how you could create different types of groups, that there is an Enable checkbox. So this enables grouping by number. Let's go ahead and disable that. We don't even really necessarily need that. Now watch what happens whenever we middle click on our Mat Group Chrome. We don't have our group. So it hasn't actually created that group. However, we have the ability to create a group by doing simple mathematical operations on our existing groups. Now, this is a really easy concept. Basically, we're going to come over to the Combine tab. And Houdini's awesome. We don't even have to necessarily do any of the math. It's going to do all of the math and give us all of the math options as drop downs. So we don't have to think too much here. So what we want to do is do this new group. And the group that we want to do here is going to be called Mat Chrome Group. Okay, this is the group that we're creating. Mat Chrome Group equals, and here we could do anything that we want. We also have the option to do does not equal or equals all but. So let's say the Material Chrome Group equals everything, and watch what happens when I pull this drop down, except the brake drum and the tire rubber. Okay, so all I did was choose the existing groups that were there from that list. So the Material Chrome Group equals everything except the brake drum group and the tire rubber group. Now whenever I middle click here after that group node, I'll see that I have 640 primitives in the brake drum group, which is what we had before. I have 320 primitives in the tire rubber group, which is what we had before. And I have this new group called Mat Chrome Group that has everything else in it, the remaining 1,824 primitives. So basically, that kept us from having to come through here and select all 1,824 of these faces that we wanted to be chrome. In the next lesson, we'll actually start to apply those materials to the groups that we've just created.